From now on, I speak in English, but I prepare my PowerPoint slide in Japanese. So if you prepare to follow Japanese, please keep looking at this slide. First section, research and results. Second section, short report of education activities. Let's go on the first section, research and results. My research examines the genesis, development, and functions of iconographies about the last days of the Virgin Mary from the 5th century to the 15th century in the Mediterranean. This theme was a frequent subject of pictorial representation in the Mediterranean from the 9th century to the 15th century, despite the absence of any canonical evidence for her death and assumption. Since the Council of Ephesus declared the Virgin Mary the Mother of God in 431, her death and posthumous glory garnered central interest. Subsequently, a large number of apocrypha were produced. Of these, 63 texts still alive in Arabic, Armenian, Coptic, Ethiopic, Greek, Irish, Georgian, Latin, and Syriac. These apocrypha were produced around the 5th century and 7th century. I analyzed these 63 stories, and following their endings, I made four categories. Simultaneously, I continued fieldwork to list up the artworks of this subject, and I made a huge database categorizing their iconography, year, author, etc. To do this analysis, I pointed out 3 research results. Firstly, these 63 apocrypha were continuously used as textual sources after the end of the 13th century, even if Golden Legend was diffused as a main textual source for the representation of this subject. The Golden Legend was written in 1263-1288 by Dominican friar Jacobus de Borrachine. Secondly, these apocrypha present alternative endings. Only her soul was elevated, or soul and body were elevated together. In the Byzantine sphere, following the former ending, the moment of her dormition, that means her death, was an oft-repeated theme. Meanwhile, in the sphere of the Roman Church, following the latter ending, the events before and after dormition were depicted. But after the research, I pointed out that both apocrypha, which narrate the different endings, were spread in both areas. Thirdly, I suggested the possible existence of lost examples of the last days of the Virgin in the Vatican Palace, because of the existence of 4 artworks which share the same composition, not only have rare subject and iconographies in common. These artworks were depicted just after the temporary return of the Roman Curia. Time is limited, so today I will show you only one example about the first point. I will show you 6 small panels. They were parts of the double-sided main altarpiece for Siena's cathedral, which were depicted by Duccio di Boninsegna, 1308-1311, and Siena's famous painter in medieval period. He pictured 6 stories about the last days of the Virgin, Annunciation of the death of the Virgin, Arrival of the Apostles, Last Salutation, Dormition of the Virgin, Funeral Procession, and some studies have claimed that the textual source must be the Golden Legend written by Jacobus de Voragine in 1263-1288, even if some details and representations of Duccio are not agreed with this text. Through the research about Apocrypha, I found that some details doesn't derive from Golden Legend, derived from Apocrypha. For example, in the scene of the death of the Virgin, Duccio represents the encounter of the Virgin and the angel in the house, and the angel has a palm tree. Golden Legend declares that the palm tree emitted some lights as the morning stirs, but the Golden Legend doesn't explain where the Virgin met with the angel. Meanwhile, the one of the Latin Apocrypha, L1, narrates that the Virgin was weeping alone in the house of the Saint John, and suddenly one angel who has a shining palm tree came into the house. For the representation of the palm tree, Duccio followed the Golden Legend, but for the scene setting, he referred the Latin Apocrypha. Let's see the next story, the arrival of the apostles. Golden Legend says that except Saint John, who arrived first, the apostles discuss the reason of unexpected summon to the Virgin's house. Meanwhile, the Latin Apocrypha, L1, narrates that except Saint John, who arrived first, the other apostles discuss the reason unexpected summon to the Virgin's house, and finally they ask who must pray firstly for God. And St. Peter and St. Paul said, "After you," to each other. Obviously, we recognize that two apostles, St. Peter, who has white hair and beard, and St. Paul, who has black long beard, shake hands and stare the face together. These representations derive from the Latin Apocrypha L1, even if this Apocrypha was produced in the 5th or 7th century. As these Duccio's panels, a lot of medieval and Renaissance artworks refer to the Apocrypha, so not only the Golden Legend, but also these old Apocrypha were continued to use for pictorial source for the representation of the last days of the Virgin Mary. Basing these analyses and studies, I wrote one book in Japanese, The Last Days of the Virgin Mary, a genealogy of the iconographies in medieval and Renaissance Italy, and it's published on December 2023 from the University of Nagoya Press. There are 7 chapters. First chapter, the earliest examples for the last days of the Virgin Mary. Second chapter, hesitation and desire as themes for the representation of the last days of the Virgin Mary. Third chapter, reception and flourishing of iconographic theme for the last days of the Virgin Mary in Italy at the end of the 13th century. Fourth chapter, Duccio's Maesta and the solidarity between Siena and its periphery. Fifth chapter, the impact of Giotto. Sixth chapter, Rome as the epicenter, the lost wall painting of the last days of the Virgin, its diffusion and influence. Seventh chapter, functions of the last days of the Virgin Mary in sacred and political spaces, relating 4 examples of the lost Vatican wall painting. Until now, 2 book reviews were written. The Yomiuri Shimbun book review on February 11, 2024. The book review press on May 18, 2024. Both reviews are fortunately really supportive and sympathetic. This book was awarded the Helen Prize by Collegium Mediterraneorum on June 29, 2024, and Nishiwaki Junzaburo Academic Prize by Keio University Faculty of Literature on July 9, 2024. After the publication, I did some presentations on both in Japanese and in other languages. Iconographies of the last days of the Virgin Mary and the Franciscans on January 14th by Kakenhi Grant in Aid for Transformative Research Area B, Religious Movements and Communication, Medium, Worldview, Social Integration, a Synthetic Approach of Historical Research by Professor Toshio Onuki. Presentation of one's own book organized by the Collegium Mediterraneostrum on February 24, 2024. Influences of the Burial of the Virgin depicted by Giotto on March 29, 2024 by Kakenhi, Grant in Aid for Scientific Research C, Florentine Painting in the Geographical Perspective, Beyond Center Periphery Model by Professor Takuma Ito. Representation of the last days of the Virgin and the Apocrypha, some Italian examples. On 11th May 2024, organized by Italian Language and Cultural Research in Waseda University, and Last Days of the Virgin, Exchanges in East and West, on June 22nd, 2024, organized by Japanese Association of University Women as an outreach activity. In February, March of this year, I did 3 presentations in Turkey and Italy, in English and in Italian. I think some of WIAS members would remember Professor Aoki Girardelli, who are visiting researcher of WIAS in last year. I and Professor Girardelli, we organized an international workshop, Space and Representations, Context and Meanings of Christian Iconography in Istanbul Technical University on February 27, 2024. I returned to Italy and one of my past nests, the Netherlands Inter-University Kunsthistorisches Institute. I was a postdoctoral researcher there in 2019. They gave me an opportunity to do a lecture about the last days of the Virgin Mary in medieval art for Netherlands students in English on March 5th, 2024. This institute is in Florence, so not only the Netherlands students, but also my ex-colleagues in Florence University came to follow my lecture. It was a gratifying thing. This lecture is recorded and it released on the YouTube. If you are interested, please scan this QR code to check it. 2 days later, I had another presentation in Italian, Accettazione e rifiuto dell'iconografia dell'Assunta in Asia nel XVI e XVII secolo, in Symposium, Europe and the Far East, Relationship, Encounter and Conflict in Modern Era, which organized by International Studies Institute in Florence and Kanazawa University. Obviously, the theme of the modern period is out of my research, but seizing this opportunity, I enlarged my interest. That is, I was wondering how was the diffusion of the iconography of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary in the world after the Counter-Reformation, so after the 15th century. I compared the iconography of the Assumption depicted by Jeronimo Nadal's commentary book to missionary work with 2 Chinese copies of Nadal's book. There are some interesting differences, both its iconographies and its inscriptions. I'd like to deepen this theme as my future research project. I participated in other research projects during these years. Our ex-colleague Fujita Sensei launched the project Intermediate Approach of Basic Science and Contemporary Art in 2020s, and we did brainstorming several times to make an artwork. July 2023, we organized unveiling ceremony of this artwork, which doesn't show some figure, but asks to feel some shape. Simultaneously, we enjoyed the tea ceremony in evening twilight to activate our feeling to see and to touch. In December 2023, Andasoba Mararu sensei and our ex-colleague Aaron Fittrell sensei planned an international symposium, The Transformation and Generation of Classics in Literature and Art, and they kindly invited me as a speaker. Happily, one of my old friends in Florence, Edoardo Gerlini, now he is assistant professor of Ca' Foscari University in Venice, participated in the symposium too. As another interest, I'm progressing the research about cave sanctuary in Western Europe. I won the prize for a poster presentation by Japan Society for Medieval European Studies, the beginning of cave sanctuary studies, the case of the Crypt of Original Sin in Matera, Italy, on June 19, 2022. And I'm planning a symposium about this theme for the research project by Yamamoto Sensei, Humanities in the Anthropocene, in next January, with 4 experts in other universities. To carry out these researches, many fundings helped me, and I really thank to this financial support. Kakenhi Grant in Aid for Young Scientists. Kakenhi Grant in Aid for Publication for Scientific Research Results. 特定課題 by Waseda University in 3 times. Research Fund by Mitsubishi Foundation. Briefly, I will report my education activities. Except Waseda University, I teach in 3 universities in these 3 years. Kyoto's Women University from 2019 to 2024, Keio University from 2019, and Seijo University from 2024, about the art history and reading class in Italian papers. For Waseda University, now I have 2 lectures, seminar for contemporary art in Faculty of Literature, and imagery and criticism for School of Culture, Media and Society. For seminar of contemporary art, contemporary art and fashion was the theme in 2023, and this year's theme is Crossing Borders in Art. I organized excursions to visit exhibitions around this theme with students. For example, we visited Yves Saint Laurent Across the Style in National Arts Center in last year. There's a future trip here, revisiting the museum's response to contemporary art after 65 years in the National Museum of Western Art in this year. And modern art collection from Paris, Tokyo, and Osaka in the National Museum of Modern Art in this year. This learning while teaching, teaching while learning activities cultivate not only students, also cultivate me as a researcher and as a teacher. Now time is up and I finish my research debriefing. Thank you for your attendance.